Hello and welcome to Chapter 10, the nervous system, where we talk about the brain and the spinal nerves. In this chapter, we're going to mainly look at the brain and the protection of the brain, and then the main parts of the brain. Not going to go into too much detail as to what the cerebellum does. Then we're going to look very briefly at disorders, and then we're going to look at the cranial nerves more in terms of what does what. So when we're looking at the brain itself, this is a a sagittal section of the brain. You have the large cerebellum, which is involved in the thinking process, thinking, feelings, hearing, sight, that basically. Then you have the corpus callosum, which is the tract that connects the left hemisphere to the right hemisphere. This is a perfect example of how white matter is in the middle of the brain and gray matter is on the outside. Completely different from peripheral nervous system, where you've got your white matter on the outside, the shiny myelin, and the gray matter inside. Okay, you also have the cerebellum. The cerebellum is used for motor memory and repetitive muscular tasks that you have trained into your body. Then you have the spinal cord, and the spinal cord comes up and it expands into the first bump, which is the medulla oblongata, then the pons, and then the midbrain. This is seen as the brainstem. It's a little hard to identify, so you have to count your bumps. Okay, when it comes to the brain and spinal cord, there is, first off, let's go to the functions. Cerebrum is the largest left and right hemisphere. There are cortexes that divide it. The diencephalon is where the thalamus and the hypothalamus are contained. The hypothalamus is part of the, usually used in the endocrine system because it communicates with the pituitary gland. Hypo means below, so the hypothalamus is below the thalamus, which is above it. Then you have the brainstem. The brainstem has three different parts: the midbrain, pons, and the medulla. These are very primitive functions. So we're talking reflex centers, respiration, and heartbeat, very low functioning. Then you have the cerebellum, which is coordinated muscle, and it also contains muscle balance and tone. So that's pretty much all you need to know for the detail of the brain. You do, however, need to know these labels. When we look at the protection of the brain is protected by a couple of things. First off, there is the skull, which isn't mentioned in your textbook, but please realize you've got bones protecting your central nervous system. You've got that cranium, which is 7 bones. Then you also have vertebrae protecting your spinal column. Then, beside the protection of the skull, you have the meninges. Meninges are tough connective tissue. And there is the dura mater, which means the big mother. Then you have the arachnoid, which has little spider-like legs coming off it. Then you have the pia mater underneath it. Inside of these float the cerebral spinal fluid, and cerebral spinal fluid is also part of the ventricles, which we'll show you in a second. So when you look at the functions of the cerebral spinal fluid, it protects the nervous system, it cushions from shock, it carries the nutrients, and it transports the waste from the brain cells. It is produced in the ventricles and travels in the 4 ventricles. I just want you to be aware that there are ventricles or spaces inside the brain. The brain is not solid. You don't need to know which one's which, just be aware that they do exist. Okay, there's a brain again. When it comes to the cerebral hemisphere, you have lobes. And you may have heard of the lobes. You have the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the temporal lobe, and the occipital lobe. In this class, you basically need to know frontal monitors motor area and speech, Parietal, sensory. Temporal is auditory, speech, and olfaction, and occipital has to do with the visual areas. There are different parts named in each area, but we won't go into those detail here. The cerebellum is mainly short-term and long-term memory. Sorry, the cerebrum is long-term memory. This then when we talk about the diencephalon is, it's kind of the interpreter. So it sorts the sensory impulses which come up from the brainstem. So you have the spinal cord taking information. It's sorted in the thalamus, and then part of it's sent to the hypothalamus, but the hypothalamus helps maintain homeostasis. It controls the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system of the autonomic nervous system. So this will control and influence heartbeat, blood flow, and secretion, hormone secretions. When you look at the brainstem is seen as very low level functioning. It's the part that connects the brainstem is the superior part of the spinal cord. It involves reflexes. It conducts impulses between the cerebellum and the lower centers. Now, the brainstem is seen as the lower center. It's usually regulating and regulating reflexes that are involved in respiration. So, reflexes involved with respiration are coughing and sneezing. When you look at the medulla oblongata, that's where the respiratory center is, the cardiac center that controls your main heartbeat, your vasomotor center, which controls your blood vessels. Very simple down at the bottom, okay? When it comes to brain imaging, there are three types of brain images that you want to be aware of. One's a CT scan. The other is nuclear magnetic resonance, or MRI. Magnetic resonance imaging, MRI. And then the positron emission topography, or PET scan. The thing about the PET scan is the PET scan will actually show active molecules being taken up. So the fact that there's different colors here means that the glucose is being absorbed differently. Both the CAT scan and the MRI are very efficient and very important in monitoring brain health. When it comes to electrical activity, the brain is full of neurons. Neurons make electrical activity. So this is the EEG, or the electroencephalography. This is electroencephalograph. The electroencephalography is the whole process. Any abnormalities in the reading show abnormalities in the brain functioning. Now, when you look at the brain has 12 spinal or cranial nerves coming off it. And the cranial nerves, cranial meaning brain, the cranial nerves come off of it. They have 12 of them, and each of them has a specific name and function. So if you look at the table in your book, it talks about each one. There are 12 of them. Some are sensory, some are motor. So these are the order. You do need to know the order of them. So here's a little acronym to help you remember. On occasion, our trusty truck acts funny. Very good vehicle anyhow. Olfactory, which has to do with smell. Optic, which is images from the eye. Ocular motor is the muscles around the eye. Trochlear has to do with one eyeball muscle. Trigeminal is the one that goes to your, has 3 branches. It goes from the eyes, the lower jaw, and the lower jaw towards the brain. So this is partly the one that the dentist tries to hit. Abducens controls the eyeball muscle. So you see that there are actually 3 different nerves that control the eyeball movement. Then you have facial, which controls facial expressions. Taste, salivary glands. So, olfactory, optic, ocular, motor, trochlear, trigeminal, abducens, and then facial. When you get to the second set, you have vestibulocochlear. The vestibule is part involved in your body in your inner ear for equilibrium, and the cochlea is used for hearing. So if you think what vestibulocochlear means, you have hearing and equilibrium. Glosso has to do with the tongue. Pharyngeal has to do with the throat. So these are things that your throat and tongue do, which is swallowing. Vagus, notice it's V-A-G-A-S, not spelt as in Las Vegas. Vagus basically has to do with thoracic and abdominal cavity. And this is the one that controls the heart, speeds up and slows down the heart. And also stimulates the, used in stimulating breathing. Then you have accessory, controls the accessories such as your neck. And you have your hypoglossal. Glossal has to do with tongue, so it's the muscles that control the tongue. So that is the cranial nerves. Please take time to learn the Roman numerals, the name, and the basic function. You will not be asked to label them, but when they come off, you will see that they come off the brain anteriorly, so that's how they get named. Briefly, in terms of brain disorders, there's a bunch of them. We won't get into too much detail. And one thing that's important is head trauma. Head trauma is important because your brain does float in fluid, and quite often you can have damage to the front, or a hit to the front of your brain, and it will cause damage at the back of your brain, and that's what Muhammad Ali and other boxers have. They'll get hit here, and then the brain floats around and goes to the back of the head and damages the back of your brain. Okay, other brain disorders, they are a little more than we need to know. You just need to be aware of them. When we look at brain words, we have cerebral, which is brain. Choreo, such as choroid plexus, has to do with membrane. Encephalo is another brain word. Cerebral, encephalo is a head word. Phasia is to do with speech, and glosso has to do with your tongue. Hypoglossal is a tongue nerve. Your epiglottis is above your tongue. Anyway, tongue words. And that is chapter 10 for us.